You think you know people. You know who is honest, who is jealous, who can be trusted, who is pretending. But Robert Greene begins with a more uncomfortable idea. What if the person you understand least is yourself? Because human beings rarely act from pure logic. We react. We defend our egos. We repeat patterns. We hide motives, even from ourselves. And then we wonder why the same conflicts keep returning. In The Laws of Human Nature, Robert Greene describes 18 recurring patterns he believes shape human behavior. The point is not to become suspicious of everyone. It is to become harder to fool, especially by yourself. Let's begin with the first law. Law 1, irrationality. We like to imagine that reason controls our decisions. But emotion often arrives first. Someone criticizes you. Your body reacts before your mind has even decided whether the criticism is true. You feel attacked. And suddenly, you are no longer asking, are they right? You are asking, how do I defend myself? That is irrationality, not stupidity. Emotion taking control before reflection has time to enter the room. Greene's practical lesson is simple. When emotion becomes intense, delay important decisions. Anger wants speed. Fear wants escape. Ego wants retaliation. Wisdom often needs time, and that pause may save you from decisions you would later spend months repairing. But emotional blindness becomes even more dangerous when everything begins revolving around one person. You. Law 2, narcissism. Everyone has some degree of self-focus. That is normal. The problem begins when another person stops being a person and becomes only a mirror. Do they admire me? Do they respect me? Are they useful to me? Greene sees narcissism as a spectrum. At one end, a person can care about themselves while still entering someone else's emotional world. At the other, almost every relationship becomes a transaction. Watch conversations carefully. When you speak, does the other person become curious, or do they simply wait for the first opportunity to make the story about themselves again? But here is the uncomfortable part. Ask the same question about yourself. Empathy is not agreeing with everyone. It is temporarily leaving your own perspective long enough to understand theirs. And that becomes essential because people are constantly performing. Law 3, role-playing. The person you meet at work is not exactly the same person their family meets at home. Around authority, people become careful. Around friends, relaxed. Around someone they want to impress, polished. That does not automatically mean deception. Human beings adapt to social situations, but Greene warns us not to confuse the role with the whole person. Words are easy to rehearse. Patterns are harder to fake. Watch what happens when someone is frustrated, when they lose status, when nobody important is watching, when a waiter makes a mistake, when someone weaker disagrees with them. One performance can deceive you. Repeated behavior usually tells you much more, which leads directly to the next law. Law 4, compulsive behavior. People repeat themselves. Different relationship, same conflict, different workplace, same enemy, different year, same crisis. Greene argues that character becomes visible through repetition. A single mistake means very little. A pattern means much more. Before trusting somebody deeply, do not listen only to what they promise. Study what they repeatedly do. How do they handle rejection? Pressure? Power? Failure? Do they always blame somebody else? Do friendships repeatedly end in the same way? The safest predictor is often not what a person says they intend to do. It is what they have already done many times. But there is another force that makes us irrational. Wanting what we do not have. Law 5, covetousness. Why does something become more attractive when it is unavailable? Why does another person's life sometimes look better? Simply because you do not live it? Greene calls this covetousness. Distance feeds imagination. What is missing becomes idealized. Then we finally obtain it. And reality returns. The new job becomes ordinary. The desired object becomes familiar. The person we romanticized becomes human. The lesson is not to stop wanting things. It is to question desire before obeying it. Ask, do I actually want this? Or do I want it because someone else has it? Because the mind is especially poor at judging things when the present moment becomes too large. Law 6, short-sightedness. An angry message arrives. You want to respond immediately. An opportunity appears. You want to say yes before thinking. Someone embarrasses you. Revenge suddenly feels urgent. Short-sightedness is what happens when today becomes so emotionally large that tomorrow disappears. Greene asks us to zoom out. What happens after this? And after that? What does this decision look like in 6 months? 3 years? Every choice creates a chain. People who can see farther down that chain are much harder to manipulate through urgency. And manipulation often fails for another reason. People hate feeling controlled. Law 7, defensiveness. Tell someone directly, "You're wrong." Then watch what happens. They may stop listening before you finish the sentence. Why? Because you are no longer arguing only with an idea. You may be threatening their identity. People want to feel intelligent, independent, respected. Greene argues that humiliation is usually a poor persuasion strategy. If you want someone to consider another position, protect their dignity while challenging the idea. Ask questions. Find what is reasonable in their argument. Let them participate in reaching the conclusion. People resist less when they do not feel defeated. But sometimes the person creating resistance in your life is you. Law 8, self-sabotage. 2 people enter the same situation. One sees an opportunity. The other sees proof that everything will go wrong. Greene places enormous importance on attitude. Not because positive thinking magically changes reality. It does not. But expectations influence attention. Attention influences behavior. And behavior influences outcomes. If you expect rejection, you may enter every conversation guarded. People sense the distance. They respond cautiously. And eventually you say, "See, nobody can be trusted." Sometimes we unknowingly participate in creating the evidence for what we already believe. And underneath those reactions may be something even harder to face. Law 9, repression. Everyone has qualities they prefer not to admit. Anger, jealousy, a need for attention, a desire for control. Greene argues that refusing to acknowledge these impulses does not necessarily make them disappear. Sometimes they simply become indirect. The person who insists they are never angry becomes vicious through sarcasm. Someone who claims not to care about status constantly attacks successful people. Someone obsessed with appearing generous may quietly keep score of every favor. The goal is not to obey every darker impulse. It is to recognize it. Because what you refuse to see in yourself can begin controlling you without your permission. And few hidden emotions disguise themselves as effectively as envy. Law 10, envy. Envy almost never introduces itself honestly. People rarely say, "Your success makes me feel inadequate." Instead, envy may sound like, "You got lucky. You've changed." It's really not that impressive. Greene tells us to notice patterns around success. Who becomes strangely cold when something good happens to you? Who offers compliments that always contain a small insult? But there is a more useful question. Who makes you envious? Because envy contains information. It may reveal an ambition you have been afraid to admit. Instead of letting someone else's success poison you, ask what it is showing you about yourself. Then turn comparison into work, because success creates another danger. Law 11, grandiosity. One victory can be dangerous. Suddenly, we believe we understand everything. A little authority becomes proof of exceptional intelligence. A successful decision becomes evidence that every future instinct must also be correct. Greene calls this grandiosity. Confidence says, "I can learn." Grandiosity says, "I already know." The antidote is reality. Keep people around you who can disagree. Study your failures. Ask what luck contributed. The moment nobody feels safe correcting you is often the moment your judgment becomes least reliable. And sometimes our limitations are not created by ego alone. They are created by the roles we believe we must perform. Law 12, gender rigidity. In this section, Greene draws partly on Jungian ideas and older frameworks about traits commonly labeled masculine and feminine. The practical point is broader. People often suppress useful parts of themselves because those qualities conflict with the identity they believe they are supposed to maintain. Someone suppresses tenderness because they think strength requires hardness. Someone suppresses assertiveness because they fear appearing difficult. Rigidity reduces your range. Maturity gives you more options. Firmness when firmness is needed. Patience when patience is stronger. Confidence without cruelty. Sensitivity without helplessness. But versatility means little without direction. Law 13, aimlessness. If you do not choose what matters, something else will choose for you. A trend, a salary, a parent, a social group, an algorithm. Greene argues that purpose organizes attention. When you know where you are going, distractions become easier to identify. Without direction, every new possibility feels equally important. Purpose does not have to mean discovering one dramatic destiny. Ask a simpler question. What am I willing to keep working on after the excitement disappears? That answer may tell you more about your direction than any motivational speech ever could. But even people with direction face an enormously powerful force, the group. Law 14, conformity. Put intelligent people together, and intelligence does not automatically increase. Sometimes individuality decreases. People begin absorbing the group's language, its enemies, its assumptions, its emotional reactions. Eventually, the group's opinion begins feeling like your own. Greene warns us to notice ourselves whenever everyone around us agrees. Ask, would I still believe this if my group believed the opposite? Can I explain the other side accurately? Can I disagree without becoming afraid of exclusion? Belonging feels safe. Independent judgment sometimes feels lonely. That is why it is rare. And groups create another difficult relationship, the relationship between followers and leaders. Law 15, fickleness. People want leadership, but they also dislike being controlled. They want confidence, but not arrogance. Strength, but not indifference. Authority is fragile. Greene argues that titles alone cannot maintain it. People eventually judge leadership through competence, consistency, responsibility, and results. The more power you gain, the more carefully people observe what you do with it. Authority must repeatedly be earned, and sometimes what looks like authority is aggression in disguise. Law 16, aggression. Aggression does not always shout. Sometimes it smiles. Sometimes it delays. Sometimes it forgets. Sometimes a person blocks you repeatedly while insisting they are only trying to help. Greene warns against assuming friendly appearance always equals friendly intention. But this is not permission to become paranoid. Look for repeated contradictions between words and actions. Then look inward too. Aggression exists in you as well. Uncontrolled, it destroys. Directed properly, some of that energy can become courage, persistence, protection, competitive drive. The goal is not to pretend aggressive impulses do not exist. It is to govern them. Because even our impulses are partly shaped by something larger than ourselves, our time. Law 17, generational myopia. You did not choose the era that formed you. Every generation grows up surrounded by particular technologies, fears, ambitions, values, and assumptions. Eventually, those assumptions become invisible. They simply feel like reality. Greene argues that this creates generational myopia. We mistake the habits of our time for permanent truths. One antidote is history. Study people who lived before your assumptions existed. Listen seriously to people older than you. Listen seriously to people younger than you. Your generation sees things others missed, and misses things others may see clearly. Perspective expands when you realize your era is only one moment in a much larger human story. Which brings us to the final law. Law 18, death denial. Modern life gives us endless ways to avoid one fact. Our time is limited. Greene does not use mortality simply to make the reader afraid. He uses it to sharpen perspective. The argument that consumed your entire day suddenly looks smaller. The project you keep postponing becomes more urgent. Someone you love becomes less ordinary. Time becomes visible. Remembering that life ends can make life more deliberate. And now, the 18 laws bring us back to the beginning. The easiest way to misuse this book would be to turn it into a weapon, to label every difficult person a narcissist, to assume every friend secretly envies you, to search endlessly for manipulation, to believe you can now read everyone. That misses Greene's deeper challenge. Human nature does not belong only to other people. You become irrational. You become defensive. You wear roles. You repeat patterns. You envy. You conform. You hide motives from yourself. So the greatest advantage this book can give you is not suspicion. It is observation. Become slower to react. Watch patterns instead of promises. Study character over time. Notice what pressure reveals, and examine yourself with the same seriousness you examine everybody else. Because people eventually reveal who they are, and so do you. The question is whether you are paying attention, because the person most capable of misleading you may sometimes be the person looking back from the mirror.